to the 2021 version of the Duane Lake Association Annual Meeting. For those of you who are not here on the lake today, it's suddenly getting very chilly out. There's a cold wind blowing across the lake and the waves are getting a little bit bigger. And you've missed, the water is extremely warm. The bass are getting big and plentiful. Eagles are being born, and today we even had a loon on the lake. So it's a nice place to be. And we're going to try to figure out through this meeting and the ones that follow how to keep it that way and make it even better. I have a program that a printed program, you might say, that I've assembled and put here on the screen just to share with you how this all is going to work. This meeting is largely for just information because of the pandemic and my own particular need to stay socially isolated and not have close meetings with other folks. These Zoom meetings will have to suffice for a while. So this meeting will be largely a presentation of information and a chance for you to ask questions by means of a chat box. You'll see either at the top of your screen or at the bottom of your screen, there is a black bar going from left to right with all kinds of items like mute, security, participants, chat. And chat is the one that you want to click on if you would like to type in a comment or a question, which Maria will then sort through them all and consolidate any that happen to be pretty much the same. And we'll do our best to answer them or at least address them. So we'll do the presentation and the questions and answers this evening. And voting will be later on. I hope to have an online ballot assembled and put into the email channels to you folks by Friday evening. So you will have between tonight and Friday to go back to our website and revisit all the documents that we'll be discussing tonight and read them and study them. And if you have any further questions, you can still send them in by email to Duane Lake Assoc, that's Duane Lake ASSOC @gmail.com, and we'll try to answer them that way too. We have already had a couple of comments, actually 3 comments that have come in already during the past week, which are posted on the website, so you can read those as well. And we'll be sharing any others that come in so that everyone has the benefit of everyone else's ideas, just as you would if this were a face-to-face meeting, just like in the old days. So that's how the meeting will go tonight. And what's on the program? First, I'd like to recognize all of our fabulous, terrific volunteers and board of directors. We will review this past year's work of the Duane Lake Association. As rather much a formality, we will ask or review or send you to the website to look at the minutes of last year's meeting so that they can be voted on too. There will be a financial report, which is also already on the website. And there will be a presentation of the annual lake management plan, which is also linked to on the website. And then last, we will have election of officers. So that is tonight's agenda. First, I'd like to really make a special effort to thank all of the volunteers who pitch in to make the Duane Lake Association go, whether it's from cleaning out the canal and the ditches and to the annual Earth Day roadside cleanup, to the poor unfortunate fellow there. It looks like he's drowning in the water. He was skin diving. He had his tanks on and his mask and everything, and he was actually diving down below the dam trying to have a look at the condition of all that, and became totally immersed in all those curly leaf pondweeds. I was afraid for his life. I thought we'd never get him out because he got so tangled. But we thank you all of you volunteers. I especially want to do a shout out to Joe Flores. I call him our culvert king. I think it's probably been 30 years at least, maybe 35, maybe more, that he has on his own, without any urging, just because he thinks it's the right thing to do, gone down into that muck and into the culvert and cleaned out debris and cut the brush. And the last couple of years, he's managed the iron grates that were put over each end of the culvert to keep the beavers out. And every so often we send in some reinforcements to help him with a cleanup crew, but he's the guy who's been doing it year in and year out. And I know he's not even here. He's not even in country at the moment, as far as I know, but I do want to thank him ever so much. And anytime you see him around, just say thank you, because the work he has put into that culvert in that canal over the years has been just enormous. I also want to thank Pat Huff, our chief bottle picker upper, for the last many years, probably for the last at least 6, I would think. She has gone around the lake every Friday, picking up bottles and cans and taking them to the bottle and can deposit center. And I just happened to notice on the latest financial report that last year alone, she took all the bottles and cans that we have left out by our roadside, and it added up to $675 in 1 year. That's pretty amazing. And so I want to thank Pat ever so much for that, as well as for every other year or so organizing our lakeside or annual lake-wide yard sale. She does it thoroughly, enormous amount of posters and signs plastering around every road of Duanesburg, it seems like, advertisements online and in the newspapers. Pat, thank you so much for both of those jobs. You do a great service for us all. I want to thank Karen Connors for taking care of the message board at the top of the hill in front of Dave and Ann Vincent's house. She puts up all the messages that I would like her to put up, and then she comes up with a lot of really nice ones of her own about holiday greetings and Memorial Day kinds of greetings and messages. And thank you, Karen, so much. I want to thank Kathy Hotailing for being my proofreader for all the newsletters that go out. Any errors that are in there are still my fault, but she catches an awful lot of them and saves a lot of embarrassment on my part. Thank you, Kathy. I want to thank Ken Pearsall for his years. I think he said it was 15 years now. He's been doing the water sampling, almost all of the water sampling for the CSLAP program. And we will discuss what the CSLAP program is further on down the line here tonight. I want to thank Dirk Felton, Carl Wiedemann, Tom McClanahan, I think it's the third, or a junior at least, Ken Pearsall, and Chris Whitaker for serving as the Lake Management Plan Committee. We are so fortunate to have their environmental training, expertise, and assistance here around Duane Lake. It's like having our own little in-house consulting company. And every year that they produce the lake management plan, it just gets better and better. I think, as you'll see when you go to the website to read it. I also want to thank Jerry Evans, Mike Gammons, and Dave Vincent for serving on our financial review committee for now, again, the third year. Ever since we got incorporated, it has seemed like the right thing to do to have a more thorough examination. I won't call it a certification exactly, but just a review of our finances to make sure that everything is shipshape. And once again, they have come up with a thorough review of all of the exhaustive amount of bookkeeping that Norm Stewart has been doing. And you will find their review online as well. But basically, they gave it a thumbs up kind of a review that everything was in good order. And I want to thank Kim Roberts for organizing our annual rowing and roving feasts. It looks like by August of this year, we're going to try another rowing feast and have some, I hope, safe kind of a rowing feast where we can get together in person, even if that may be arm's length, at least in my case. So thank you all to those volunteers. And to our board of directors, we have, I think, a really top-notch board of directors. Pat Huff serves as our vice president. Maria serves as our secretary. Norm Stewart is treasurer. And the directors are Chris Whitaker, Michael Lynn McClanahan, Chris Miller, Dirk Felton, and Kim Roberts. For the past many years now, I can't even count, at least 5, maybe all 6 years that I've been president, we have had a monthly meeting every single month. We have not missed but only one month that I know of that we've skipped in that time. We've gotten a great deal accomplished, I think, as you will see as we move along here. So the year in review, what has your Duane Lake Association been actually doing? One of the things that is high on the list, and I put it here at the top of the list, is research. We have been doing a great deal of testing and analyzing of, or sampling and analyzing of water, soils, and literature reviews of the science journals pertaining to lake management and lake ecology, and also various grants that are available and various laws that pertain to uh, nonprofit associations and how various government programs and the laws that govern that. For example, some of you may have heard that a couple of years ago, there was a new program that was passed by the state legislature, which provided for a 50% subsidy for repair or replacement of backyard septic systems. It seemed like it was tailor-made for a Duane Lake situation. But unfortunately, despite lots of efforts and investigating and phone calls and emails and knocking on doors, we were informed that Duane Lake is not eligible for that program because it is a private lake. I personally think that was an incorrect decision by DEC, and there may be opportunities down the road to push that a little further on our behalf, but investigating those kinds of things takes a whole lot of time. And just to quickly review the kinds of soil and water sampling that has been done over the years. First of all, I want to mention the CSLAP program. CSLAP is CSLAP, an acronym, CSLAP. It stands for Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program. It's a program coordinated by the New York State Association, New York State Federation of Lake Associations, in conjunction with DEC. And it provides for a very systematic methodology and materials and reporting for a whole number of water testing items such as clarity and other biological factors. Ken Pearsall has been doing that testing now for 15 years. So that's been ongoing. And it costs us somewhere around $500 a year to be in that program, and I think it's highly worth it. But recently I came across some old tests that I wanted to remind everyone about. Back in the 1980s, a previous group of people who were involved with the Duane Lake Association, they were involved with some extensive water testing. One individual went around the lake and sampled probably 20 different, maybe 25 different locations around the lake, took water samples and made careful notations as to where those samples had been taken, and sent them to a laboratory affiliated with St. Peter's Hospital, and was able to document the E. coli content for each of those samples at all these different locations around the lake. And it was really quite interesting. It showed, for example, like a very high E. coli concentration at the mouth of the inlet that comes into the stream, and at a few locations slightly into the lake from there. And as you went progressively further into the lake and down to the other end, there was less of it until you got to the cove, and then there were high readings again. And those readings are still in the files and probably need to be updated again to a 2021 database. After all, they're 40 years old and things may have changed. And in fact, we recently had a different kind of a water test done that actually raises some questions about the validity of those tests or the accuracy for this date now today. I learned that there's a laboratory in Florida that actually has the technology to test water samples for what they call DNA markers. And they tested DNA markers specifically for specific species of biological critters. For example, they can find DNA markers that are excreted exclusively by cows. In fact, there are two different ones that are excreted exclusively by cows. So using that test, we had this laboratory on two different occasions look for evidence of contamination from the beef cattle feedlot that is upstream. The first series of tests was done, was a mixed sample from Duane Lake, one sample that was blended from many different sources. It found no evidence whatsoever of bovine or cow contamination. It found no evidence of contamination from geese. Oh, I take that back, excuse me. It did find trace elements of goose contamination, and it found no trace elements of human contamination. So, which calls into question whether the results of those earlier E. coli tests are still valid. So it's time to do more testing of that to see how they match up against these new tests. Moreover, back in, I think it was early April, I took additional samples from the water samples from the stream coming in, and only from that one source, nowhere else in the lake, just in that stream as it flowed into the lake. This was done at high water after a series of rainstorms when the cows upstream happened to be very close to that stream. Sent those samples in. And again, they came back with no evidence of cow contamination. I was surprised. I was very surprised. I fully expected that we would find it, and that if we did not find it on that date in those conditions, we would never find it. That it's just not there. So I think that is a very surprising result, and I think it's highly trustworthy. But again, it deserves to be repeated every so often to make sure that it's still valid. And if we have further findings of no contamination from those cows, the more we do that, the stronger the evidence will be that, and in fact, it is not a problem. I fully suspected that it was, but apparently it's not. I also took some water samples from that same inflowing stream 2 years ago and had it tested for Roundup, the herbicide Roundup contamination, because there are 2 property owners upstream who you can see visually that they use a lot of Roundup. And I was concerned that was getting into the lake. Tests found no evidence, not even a trace element of any Roundup. So that was good news. And then we also took some samples of mud, basically had soil samples from 8 different locations around the lake under the water using a clamshell device that we borrowed from the U.S. Geological Survey, and took them from 8 prominent locations around the lake. One at the mouth of the stream flowing in, a few locations along the shoreline, at the base of the dam, in the cove. And we found, these samples were sent, by the way, these samples were sent to the Cornell University Nutrient Analysis Lab, and they came back showing extraordinarily high elevations of phosphorus in the mud at 3 locations, actually 2 locations. The highest reading was at a location where a downhill run of roadside ditch outflow with lots of silt in it from a driveway that had a high content of crusher run stone. That location, when the mud was extracted, where that discharged into the lake, that location showed an extraordinarily high count of phosphorus. Why is that important? Phosphorus is jet fuel for blue-green algae blooms. So those kinds of tests are beginning to build a library of data that we can use to make management decisions. Right now, those tests tell me that the highest priority for stopping blue-green algae needs to be to stop silt from such locations as I just described from getting into the lake. We have put silt barriers in that ditch now over the last 2 years, and we can hope that it's having some beneficial effect. There may be other locations where it needs to be done too, and there may well need to be a bit more cooperation from the town highway department in doing their share. All those things are being pursued. So those are the kinds of tests that are being done with your dollars, and it's adding up to a very solid base of science by which to make decisions. The next thing I wanted to mention was the outlet canal, pardon me, the wetlands permit application. That's number 2 there, the second item on the list. Last year at the annual meeting, we talked about a lake management plan, which included a very light dredging, a removal of a small amount of sediment from the outlet canal, because it had collected a lot of debris, and there may have been a tree root that was raised in the bottom, and it was raising the level of the lake a couple of inches. We were not able to get that work done last year because the process of developing a wetlands permit application that had to be submitted to DEC was a very long, laborious process. The Schenectady County Soil and Water Conservation District donated their services to come and do an elevation survey to actually determine the precise amounts of elevation in that lake, in that canal bottom, so we knew exactly where the problem was. The application has been finally approved. It was approved early this year, so now that work has to be rolled over into this summer. And we plan to have it done in the driest possible conditions when that outflow is at a minimum. So that is underway. It took a long time though to get that taken care of. There's also been a significant amount of brush cutting in the outlet canal this spring. Again, with Joe Flores' guidance and stimulation, shall we say, we had a small crew of people get out, volunteers, to do some cutting and removal of brush. And that'll have to be done periodically. We've also had the issue we've been looking at of what we call unauthorized fishing. There have been some cases, some of them are kind of hard to deal with, where people who are not authorized to be fishing on the lake, because it is a private lake, have been on the lake. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. I mean, it's tolerable to a degree, but some of those people have been observed trashing the lake. That gets to be a problem. And also the fact that unauthorized fishing is actually part of our deed restrictions and a declaration of covenants. We are told by attorneys that if you do not enforce a single one of those deed restrictions, all of them are at risk of being invalidated. So to pursue a possible remedy of that, and also to solve another problem too, which I'll discuss, we have pursued a remedy to that, which I'll be discussing under the lake management plan. And in fact, I'll go into that right now. It gets it. And the first item I want to mention as part of that lake management plan is the matter of the lake bottom ownership. Some of you know the history of Duane Lake, and it's rather a strange one to us, but actually it's a very common one. When you start researching the history of lakes like Duane Lake, not only in upstate New York, but all over the Northeast, in New England, in New Jersey, down in Virginia, you will find many, many cases of lakes that are just like Duane Lake, in that they were built either in the 1800s or the early 1900s to be mill ponds, to be ponds that drove old water-powered mills for grain or lumber or those kinds of things. And as those enterprises became unprofitable, the owners of those properties either sold them for house lots or just abandoned them and let the property owners around the lake figure out what to do next. That's kind of what happened to Duane Lake. In 1980s, the Bosanquille Lake Corporation, which was formed in 1925 roughly to build the dam and to recreate the old Duane Lake, that corporation was put into receivership, basically taken over by a court. And the court appointed receiver found buyers for the unsold properties. And among those buyers was someone who bought a large chunk of land on the east end of the lake. And also with that came along ownership of the lake bottom, which he probably didn't want, but it came with it anyway. And he sold that property, the land itself, not the lake bottom. He sold the land to a company called Timberland Consultants, which then sold house lots. And then after a while, he dissolved his corporation, which was called Railcraft. He dissolved his own corporation, stopped paying taxes on it, and by law, such properties on which taxes are not paid revert to county ownership. Duane Lake went into a period of murky ownership in that Schenectady County decided it didn't want anything to do with ownership, and so it just sat there as nobody owning it. Duane Lake was unclaimed by the county. It was unclaimed by its former corporate owner. It was unowned, and the unpaid taxes began building up. But a problem arose with that, and that is, what if some party, some organization, some company, or some property owner decides he wants to buy it? And what happens then? I can give you an example of what happens then, because as I just described, this experience has happened around the Northeast in numerous mill ponds and corporate-owned ponds. For example, just down the road in Schoharie County, it's called, up on Summit Lake, in that area, there is a small lake called Bear Gulch Lake. Same situation. Ownership is in dispute. No one knows who owns it. Some claim that the county should own it. Some say that the old corporation that did own it years ago should still be owning it. No one claims ownership. It's a mess. Same thing with Kinderhook Lake over in Columbia County. Ownership is in dispute. It was an old mill pond. And a place where I grew up in Rhode Island, where I used to go fishing as a kid, Johnson's Pond, I read the other day that somebody, without anyone knowing about it, not a single owner around the lake, a property owner around the lake knew about it, somebody bought the lake and has begun draining it. Not a good outcome. So the proposition was put to the county attorney by me, by the board of directors, and I asked the county attorney, what if the Duane Lake Association board of directors was willing to accept ownership of the lake bottom? Not saying that we would necessarily, but what if? And so he discussed it with the county real property tax office. He discussed it with the county legislature, and the county legislature went ahead and passed a resolution authorizing transfer of the ownership of the lake bottom to Duane Lake Association Incorporated. And $12,000 in back taxes would be forgiven, not paid. No fees would have to be paid by us for the filing of the deed, which turned ownership over to us, basically just given to us, so that we can protect our lake from strange happenings in the future of somebody we don't know taking ownership and doing strange things with it. And also, it would give us the authority to enforce trespass law. We have had a very difficult time doing that in the past, to enforce our deed restrictions, because every time we would call either the state police or the county sheriff's department, they would say, do you own the lake? We have to say, no, we don't. We represent the owners. Oh, sorry, you don't own the lake, so we can't do anything about it. But if we own the lake, then we do have a standing to do something. So that has been discussed by the board, and you are, through your chat box here tonight, you can ask questions or pose comments. 3 people have already posed comments or opinions on the website, so you can see those too. But by and large, I think the comments and the opinions I have heard have been positive, and the Duane Lake Association Board of Directors is unanimous in its support of this plan. So that has been a big part of the year in review. And of course, part of that is shopping for insurance. We dare not get involved if we can't get proper insurance for it. But finally, with Carl Wiedemann's assistance, he pointed me in the direction of a lake association in Cortland County, who had an insurance policy for their lake with an insurance agent in Monticello, whom I contacted, and sure enough, we were able to find an insurance policy that would be adequate and very affordable for about roughly $150 a year additional. And at the same time, it would lower our insurance that we have to pay every year for our directors and officers insurance. So our net insurance bill would drop by more than 50% for the two policies. And then comes the matter of the dam. The dam is not owned by the Duane Lake Association. It is owned by a private owner, a local attorney, and he has granted us permission to engage in management activities on that dam. As the owner, and he doesn't even live on the lake. He's had very little incentive to do any management work on it over the years, although it clearly needed some. And so he has authorized the association to take necessary steps where we think necessary. So we have consulted with an arborist to examine the pros and cons of cutting the trees off the back of the dam. The board is presently of the opinion that that is a bad idea, even though DEC says we should do it, because removing them would cause more problems than it solves. We have also, in this year's lake management plan, we have a proposition for pouring more large riprap, big giant rocks, basically down the face of the water side to repair that. A report we had done a couple years ago by a dam safety engineer recommended that we do that, and so we now have money for doing that, and it's in our lake management plan for this year. So of course, then to do all this, we need money, and we need members for a lot more than money, but your money really, really does help. And later on in this report tonight, you will see where the money is coming from and where it's going. And we have developed a substantial nest egg that we can now devote to some of these projects. And then, of course, the last thing, but not at all the least important, is the matter of communicating with members and keeping them informed through newsletters, email notices, and our website. So in a nutshell, that's what your board has been up to the past year. So it is somewhat of a formality, but an important one. We follow Robert's Rules of Order, which is basically a handbook for how meetings and organizations should be run. And by the way, just a little side dressing here, a little digression. Robert's Rules of Order happens to have been written back by a Civil War veteran who happened to live in Owego, New York, just the other side of Binghamton. So it's a local product, but it's an excellent guide for running meetings and running organizations. And one of the formalities that we like to recognize is the review of last year's annual meeting minutes to make sure that everyone is in, or the majority of you are in accordance with how it's been presented and the resolutions offered and voted upon. And although we will not be doing any voting tonight, there will be a resolution on the online ballot for you to vote on that. So that will be done this weekend with the online ballot. Duane Lake finances. Here's the snapshot. In the year 2020, our association took in $5,630, our treasurer tells us, which struck me as surprising. I was expecting that I was normally around 3,500, but we had a really good year, took in that amount of money, and we spent $38.95. Where did the income come from? $38.25 in dues, $1,130 in donations. Just people saying, I want to donate more money to help the association. And plus the $675 in cashed in bottles and cans. I do hope we can keep somewhere near that $5,000 a year income or more coming in, because it is so helpful to us. For example, when we do the dredging of the canal this summer, we'll be hiring a contractor with some pretty heavy equipment to do what I guess we could have done with manual labor, but I can't speak for all of you, but I know I'm getting older, and that kind of work would not be a pleasant task or easy for me anymore. And I think a lot of folks who are retired and have the time to do it no longer have the strength to do it. So some machinery is a good idea. Expenses. This past couple of years, it has cost us $783 for insurance, which is required for the board of directors liability by our bylaws. But that is going to go down significantly when we adopt the new policy next year. That'll go down to $330 to include both the present insurance and the insurance for the lake liability. Costs us about $245 for newsletters and mailings. That has gone down from over $1,000 because we're doing almost everything by emails and online now. Very few people need or want the mailed version of the newsletter. But if that's what you prefer, that's what you'll get, because it's important for us to stay in touch with you. And it costs us about $520 for that CSLAP program and the New York State FOLA membership, Federation of Lake Associations. And in the previous year, there would have been expenses like there were $800 for legal fees to help us figure out proper positions and actions to make sure what we were doing is legal, but that's not a typical annual expense. Also common in other years, $1,500 for the soil and water test. That'll stay pretty constant, I think. And through all that, through all those expenditures, we have, believe it or not, $14,219.22 in the bank. Well, those kinds of savings can go towards some of these major projects that we've been talking about. So we're gaining ground financially, and I do hope that a few more memberships will still come in this year to boost this year's income even more. And I thank you all for your support. It's been invaluable. We could not do the work that we do without your support. A little bit more about Duane Lake finances. Norm Stewart has gotten an A+ grade from our financial review committee every year for the past 3 years. The committee has been appointed annually since we got incorporated, and our 3 committee members have been Jerry Evans, Mike Gammons, and Dave Vincent. I asked Jerry Evans to be on the committee because He taught business law at Schenectady County Community College. I asked Mike Gimmons to be on the committee because he does tax returns, and I figure he knows the Internal Revenue Service a whole lot better than I do. And Dave Vincent, because he ran a pretty large business for quite a long time. And so those three people, I think, have been really, really super at reviewing all the financial records that NOM provides, which is everything, all the checkbook stubs and records, ledgers, all of the monthly financial reports that he provides, and the committee gave it a very strong vote of approval. And Jerry Evans, who submitted the report, wrote, Mike Gammons deserves a special appreciation for his detailed review and helpful input this year. And he wrote, as always, Norm Stewart should be commended for his good work and his generous contribution of time to the important office and the work it requires. And Norm, if you're not too embarrassed by all that, if you'd like to add anything to the financial comments, this is your big chance. He's quiet, so.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I don't think anything really to add. I think that the reports are online for everyone to look at their leisure. And if at any time anyone has any questions about it, I feel happy to email me and I'll try to get back to you promptly.
Thanks, Norm. Thank you. And just to reiterate what Norm just said, all of the financial records, summaries for the year are on the Duane Lake Association website. And you have 3 days to review them if you so choose. So anything else, Norm? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So on to the lake management plan. One of our committee, Lake Management Plan committee members made the observation that every year the plan becomes more sophisticated and more fleshed out and more developed, which I think is a really good thing. The first year was pretty rudimentary. The second year got to be a little more detailed. This year it's a whole lot more detailed, particularly as relates to linking it to financial considerations with budget numbers and basically answering the question, how are we going to do this? And so again, it is on the website. You can read the whole thing, but here are the high points and a summary of it. It's divided into different components. You could call them different goals, I suppose, or different objectives. The first one is to monitor water quality. I discussed that a little bit already, and the plan calls for continued vigorous soil and water testing. It's a reality check. It tells us what's really happening out there and whether there's a problem. And if so, where is it? For example, the underwater soil test or the test to check for cow contamination. Those will continue, and we have a budget item established for that. The second is to reduce nutrient loading, and this would deal with septic management, the silt mitigation that I talked about earlier, which I think is a remarkably large piece of our problem personally, aquatic weed removal, which I'll discuss in a minute, and roadside ditch management, which is part of that silt mitigation. A couple of words about the aquatic weed removal. Some of you will recall that in past years we've had work parties where, I don't know, 30 or 40 of us, it seemed like, would gather at a certain place, and we still have a weed harvesting mower that actually attaches to the front of a rowboat underwater, and it's battery powered, and you drive it along like you were a tractor on a hayfield mowing the hay, only it's cutting the underwater weeds, which then float to the surface, and we scoop them all up and put them in our boats and take them to the shore and haul them off to someplace. And we probably make about a 0.15% difference in the lake by doing that every year, and it was darned hard work, but we made some small difference here and there. So the board of directors has for many years repeatedly examined the possibility of buying a high-powered, super-duper motor-powered harvesting machine. Again, it's like a tractor that drives back and forth across the lake, harvesting and collecting all the weeds and hauling them to shore, dumping them automatically, and then going back and getting more. It's like if you're at all familiar with agriculture, it's like a silage harvesting tractor that goes along and collects all the undried hay and dumps it into a big trailer and takes it off to the silo. Well, in this case, we'd be hauling off curly leaf pondweed from under the water and hauling it off to a pile somewhere down the road. The possibility of buying such a machine was been thoroughly explored many times over, and we keep coming up with the same answer. It's expensive, $80,000 or so, and we have explored the possibility of buying a machine jointly with Mariahville Lake, and they've run into the same arguments. And also the problem of where do you store it? Who's going to take care of it? Who's qualified to do the maintenance on it? Those kinds of issues. Do we need an additional amount of liability insurance in case somebody gets hurt driving this thing, or in case it chops up somebody's underwater household water line? So those kinds of issues became a problem. So then we thoroughly, repeatedly began exploring for a contractor who could do it for us. And there are 3 or 4 companies that have come to our attention that do this on a contract basis. We had them come out and look at the lake and give us price quotes. And ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your hats, but it's $20,000 a year. We don't have $20,000 a year. We're a long way from having $20,000 a year. It's not going to happen. But we're also finding, as time goes on, that there are some lake management scientists who are telling us that maybe it's not all that important anyway. Maybe that it in some cases it actually just makes the problem worse. It opens up an ecological niche for other weeds to come in some cases. In some cases, it just does not make any significant difference because most of the problem is in the mud on the bottom. That's the source of all this phosphorus that feeds blue-green algae. And we're stuck with that. Unless we drain the lake and bulldoze it and dredge it, that phosphorus is going to be there for a very, very long time. Removing curly leaf pondweed at the time that it breaks loose around the 1st of July removes some of that phosphorus because the plant takes up the phosphorus almost like a sponge. And if you can remove that repeatedly, over the decades, you will eventually reduce the amount of phosphorus in the mud and on the bottom. But it's not in our lifetime is it going to be reduced significantly. So to make a long story short, the board has focused, and this lake management plan has focused on silt mitigation, managing our septic systems better, because nitrogen and phosphorus come from that as well to a degree, although the recent tests make us wonder just how much. And also just basically focusing on that silt mitigation, because that is clearly happening. You can see with your eyes, and our tests verify that it is a big source. So that is a big part of reducing the nutrient load. Another part of the management plan is to monitor and manage the dam. Even though it's not ours, we have permission to do so. The lake, the dam study that was done a couple of years ago by the dam safety engineer also had a look at, there's a pipe that goes under the dam, and there's an old valve on it that has not been turned in 50 or 60 years at least. It probably should never be, because if you did, you'd never get it closed again. But he looked at that pipe and saw that there was a trickle of water coming out of it. He said, you really need to monitor the flow of that leakage. And if it gets worse, you'll have to take some kind of action to repair it. So we have been monitoring it starting last summer. We have been monitoring the flow, and it has been found to be very steady at about 1 gallon per minute. That may seem to be high, but compared to the millions of gallons of water in the lake, it's truly a drop in the bucket. And it has been consistent. It hasn't changed. So far, we're not worried. But we're also wanting to manage the dam on the face by putting the rip wrap stones on the face, and also do some repair work to the top of the dam where a couple of high water episodes have caused a bit of damage. You may recall Hurricane Irene. Hurricane Irene overflowed the top of the dam and caused some erosion at the back side of the dam and the front side both. That needs to be repaired. And it happened back in the 1955. We have old photographs that show a hastily assembled rescue team of volunteers from around the lake running out to the dam and piling sandbags on and putting sheets of aluminum over the top of the dam, trying to minimize the friction of the water going over the top. and it caused quite a stir. And as a result of that, the state of New York actually directed that the spillway for Duane Lake be lowered by 2 feet. And the state actually stepped in and directed the destruction of the spillway and the construction of the replacement. So the spillway is supposed to be controlling the lake 2 feet lower, but there have been some issues with that because the culvert that the town put in 2 years or 20 years later actually is 2 feet higher than the spillway. So we're right back where we started from. So anyway, make a long story short, we have to take care of the dam, and we have to monitor the possibility of a high water event again, knowing in advance that it's rising fast by having some benchmarks in the culvert so that we can take some actions that a committee will have to decide what those actions are to mitigate any emergencies, few though they may be, and take appropriate action. So that is in the management plan too. The next item is to control wildlife as necessary. I mean, no one likes to see muskrats and other animals removed, beavers removed from the lake because they're interesting to watch, but sort of like mice in your house or rats in your garage, there are times when you have to do something. And so from time to time, we do have muskrats and beavers removed from the lake when it's really necessary because it's causing a problem, a potential problem for the dam or the outflow. So that is in the plan also. Also to address what the committee called quality of life issues, to include an annual litter pickup, we'll keep on doing that, and the trashing of the lake by unauthorized fishermen, hence the discussion about taking ownership of the lake bottom and what powers that brings us. Last, to ensure that our association operations and finances are aligned with these goals, including how do we raise more money? Do we need to raise more money in some way? How do we pay for these projects that loom ahead of us? And right now, our answer to that is, well, we just keep saving money. We keep accumulating a surplus of savings in a bank account that we can eventually put towards these projects. And it takes 2 or 3 to 4 years to accumulate enough to do a project. That's what we're doing right now. But the lake management plan calls for the appointing of a committee to look at this situation and figure out if there are other ways that we can raise money for these projects. And I was glad to see that become part of the lake management plan, because there's no sense having a plan that you can't actually put into effect because you can't afford it, which has been the case with harvesting weeds, but that doesn't mean we can't do other things. So that pretty well summarizes the lake management plan. And if you have any questions or comments about that, be sure to type them into the chat box or send them to the Duane Lake Association via email, and we'll share them in whatever way we can with all the members prior to the vote. The last item on the agenda is election of officers. We have 4 terms of office that are expiring as of tonight. My term as president, actually I've had 2 terms, 6 years as president. Norm Stewart as treasurer. Chris Whitaker's term as director ends tonight, even though it may be a short one for her because she was appointed to take the position of Ward Freeman when he resigned a couple years ago. And Dirk Felton, his position also is up for re-election. He also took a position which was vacated by Pat Huff, who took the position of vice president when Dave Elliott was obliged to resign. So those are the terms that are up for office, and I tried to make it clear, somewhat enthusiastically clear, I hope, in my emails and on the website, that anyone who is a dues paid member can stand for election. All 4 of our present officers and directors whose terms are expiring have expressed their willingness to be elected to another 3-year term. But any dues paid member can seek election to any of these offices. And if you would like to stand for office, please send an email to the Duane Lake Association so as to be included on the ballot. Voting will be done via an online ballot a few days after this meeting. So far, we have received no volunteers. No one has stepped forward to say, yeah, I would like to run for office. No one has mischievously nominated a neighbor to be running for office. which has happened in the past. So those at the present are the only 4 candidates. But again, if anyone has any inkling of a desire to run for office, to run this really fine organization, please do so. And I will tell you now, having served 14 years as newsletter editor and 6 years as president, that I do not intend to complete another term as president if I am elected. I will serve, but I do not intend to complete the 3-year term. I have health reasons. I'm getting too old and feeble. Frankly, I'm not as mentally sharp as I think I might have been once. There are family concerns that I want to take into consideration. And frankly, I think it's better for an association to move on and keep new blood coming on all the time. I think I've often used to quote a local basketball coach, Pat Riley, who went on to coach in the NBA. He said after a few years of coaching the New York Knicks, he said, after a while, a coach's act gets old and the players don't want to hear it anymore. And I think that can happen here too. And I think at some point it becomes time to move on. And so sometime in this first term, I will be saying goodbye. So I'm telling everyone up front right now that if you see that as an opening to run for president, go for it. If not, then at some point down the road, the board will have to appoint another president. But I will serve for at least a year. So I'll at least make that promise. So with all that, are there any questions or comments that you folks that you have sent in? And I will ask Maria, our secretary, if she has any chat items to share.
So far, the one question that I had was from the beginning of the meeting from Dirk.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to know if, and I figured Pat would be the best person to have the answer to that question. It was, where did I put it? Does the association have an account at the Redemption Center for cans and bottles?
Yes.
That way Pat doesn't have to pick them all up.
Oh.
So.
The answer is yes. And in fact, we have 1 or 2 people who actually do take them there on their own, but not many. Most people just put them out.
So that is all I have so far. I did put the Duane Lake Association email in the chat.
Okay. And also, I promised Dirk, and I totally forgot that when discussing the lake management plan, I would give him a chance to speak on that because he was the chairman of the lake management plan committee and did, I think, a superior job, really a fine job of putting that all together. So Dirk, the floor is yours if you'd like to speak on the lake management plan.
Actually, Alan, you covered it very well. The only thing I would say is that luckily Duane Lake isn't changing very fast. It's interesting to read the news. Lake George, when I was young, a kid, it used to be clear and people would talk about seeing the bottom 25, 30 feet out. And now they have zebra mussels and harmful algal blooms this past year. So things can get worse in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And I think we just have to be vigilant that that doesn't happen to our small version of Lake George. Mm-hmm. So it's just something we need to keep working on and not just think it'll take care of itself.
Yes, yes. I think we are, in some ways, extremely fortunate that we have such a small lake. I mean, our problems are tiny compared to those of big lakes.
Right.
Yeah. I would also commend to your reading the most recent Duane Lake Association newsletter. They had an article in there written by a gentleman, a lake science specialist, aquatic science specialist, associated with Lake Champlain. And this guy has been around for decades studying this issue, and his perspective on blue-green algae management, particularly as it relates to Lake Champlain, but talking about it as a worldwide phenomenon, accelerated by climate change, particularly, and accelerated by massive use of fertilizers by agriculture in particular. I think it provides it's a reality check that his view is yeah, you can do a lot to mitigate blue-green algae to a degree, but because of climate change, don't expect a whole lot. So I think it behooves us to do the things that we can do, even insofar as our own little piece of lessening the burning of fossil fuels by ourselves, or whatever it takes that we can do personally. Believe it or not, that is affecting blue-green algae. It's affecting the presence of a toxic thing, blue-green algae toxins, which are, blue-green algae doesn't always produce toxins, but it can. And climate change can make that worse. So we have to be careful. Anything else, Dirk?
Oh, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you to all the folks on that committee for I think, a really fine job. I was so impressed with the work that so many people did. You yourself, Carl Wiedemann, was tireless in digging up data and information to send my way and sharing with the committee. And I thank all of you. It was an excellent job. Thanks. It gets better every year. So unless Maria has still more comments or questions on the chat box, do you?
Carolyn said, don't forget to maintain vigilance for water chestnuts.
Yes. Yeah, good point. Yeah, do a Google search for water chestnuts and pictures of them. And it doesn't hurt to paddle around the lake once in a while and to see them, yank them out. Yeah, there are some lakes around us that are full of it, and it's not pretty. It's not a good thing. Yeah. Anything else? If not, I think we're done. Don't forget to visit the website. Oh, by the way, just a reminder here. Nothing is getting decided here tonight. All dues paid members will receive an email link to a ballot. You'll be voting on the minutes of last year's meeting, the report of the financial committee, the lake management plan, and election of officers and directors. That will all be on the ballot. So what's next? Go and enjoy the lake and take care of it. And with that, I wish you all a good night.